to the Work Loving Podcast. I'm your host, Keana W. Mitchell. And as always, I am here to help you navigate relationships with clarity, confidence, and emotional safety. Because you deserve love that feels like peace, not confusion. You deserve connection that honors your worth, not situations that keep you guessing. So today's episode is one that I know many people are talking about, and I think at one point in our lives, all of us has gone through a situation or a relationship that ended up being like a situationship. I know I did. It happened when I had just graduated from college. I had moved across the country to a different part of the United States, and it was my first time living alone and everything. And so I was living alone, first job out of college, and there was a guy that I liked, and I thought he liked me, but it seemed like there was never any indication of what we were. I wasn't sure if he liked me for real or if he didn't. And years later, as I look back on it, I was like, oh, wow, that was probably a situationship. But I had no idea what it was because that terminology was not something that we talked about when I got out of college. So today's episode, we're going to talk about situationships versus real relationships and how to stop settling for less. And most importantly, how to recognize if you are in a situationship. We are going to break down what a situationship actually is, what people and why people actually fall into them. I know for me, I just didn't know what it was. I was really young, first relationship, first everything. And so I was totally clueless. But that could be one of the reasons why someone may fall into a situationship. We're also going to talk about what psychologists say about emotional impacts of situationships and how to recognize when you're settling for crumbs instead of choosing the whole meal. And most importantly, how to get out of a situationship if you don't want to be in one. But before we get into all of that, I do want to take a minute to recap last week's episode of the podcast because it connects directly to today's conversation. So last week we talked about healthy boundaries in dating, what they look like, and how to set them. And I said something that I want to repeat today. Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me together. That quote from Prentice Hemphill is one of my favorites because it reminds us that boundaries aren't about pushing people away. Boundaries are about protecting our emotional safety. And when boundaries are missing, that's when situationships can happen. So today, we're going to be talking about all of that. But first, let's get into last week's episode of the podcast. So last week's podcast was all about how boundaries are not walls, how they're clarity. We talked about healthy boundaries in dating. And I want to revisit that conversation because boundaries are the foundation for every emotionally healthy relationship. And the absence of boundaries is the foundation of almost every situationship. So last week, we talked about how boundaries are not walls. They're clarity, they're communication, they're self-respect in action. Boundaries tell people how to treat you, how to love us, and how to show up for us consistently. And when we don't set boundaries, we unintentionally teach people that inconsistency is acceptable, that confusion is normal, and that our needs are optional. We also talked about the psychology behind boundaries. Dr. Brene Brown says, daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves even when we risk disappointing others. And that's exactly what boundaries do. They protect our emotional well-being, even when someone else doesn't like it. We explored practical examples, saying what you need without apologizing for it, communicating expectations early instead of waiting until you're hurt, recognizing red flags and responding to them instead of rationalizing them, choosing partners who value clarity, consistency, and accountability. And here's the part that connects directly to today's episode. When boundaries are unclear, inconsistent, or non-existent, you end up in relationships that are unclear, inconsistent, or non-existent. And that is the exact definition of a situationship. Situationships thrive in the absence of boundaries. They thrive in silence. They thrive in fear of asking for clarity. They thrive when we're unable, or when we're afraid of losing someone, even if that someone isn't showing up for us. So, as we move into today's topic, I do want you to keep last week's episode close to your mind and to your heart. And I want you to remember that healthy boundaries create healthy relationships. Now, if you want to listen to last week's episode of the podcast, just click on the link in the show notes and you will hear last week's episode of the podcast. Before we dive back into today's conversation, I want to take a minute to personally invite you into something very special, into my You Are Worth Loving signature coaching program. This is my 12-week trauma-informed coaching experience designed to help you break unhealthy patterns, rebuild your self-worth, and create emotionally safe relationships that actually feel good for your soul. If you've been listening to the Worth Loving podcast and thinking, I'm ready for deeper support, this is your next step. Inside the program, we work together one-on-one to help you reconnect with your voice, your boundaries, and your confidence so you can stop settling for relationships that drain you and start choosing ones that honor you. I'm only taking 3 clients for the month of May because I honestly want to give each person the time, energy, and care they deserve. So, if you've been waiting for a sign to start your healing journey, this is it. Click the Stan Store link in the show notes to apply or learn more. You are not too much. You are not broken. You are worthy of love, and you are worthy of relationships that feel safe, healthy, and whole. Now, let's get back to today's episode. So let's start by defining what a situationship actually is, because a lot of people are in one and they don't even realize it. Now, a situationship is an undefined romantic connection with no clear commitment, no clear direction, and no clear expectations. It's the quote-unquote almost relationship, the we're talking, the we're vibing, the we're hanging out, the we're not together but we act like it, or it's complicated type of relationships. It's emotionally inconsistent, unpredictable, and often one-sided. Psychologist Dr. Carla Marie Manley says situationships thrive on emotional ambiguity, leaving one partner feeling undervalued. And that's exactly what happens. One person gets just enough attention to stay, but not enough consistency to feel secure. Now, let's contrast what a real relationship is. Now, a real relationship is defined by clarity, commitment, and emotional safety. It's built on mutual respect, shared values, and consistent effort. Dr. John Gottman, one of the leading researchers in relationship psychology, says that trust and commitment are the foundations of a long-term connection. So, real relationships have both consistent communication, emotional availability, shared goals, accountability, respect, stability, and a clear we. So you'll know that you are in a committed relationship. A situationship looks like inconsistent communication, emotional highs and lows, avoidance of labels, confusion, mixed signals, a lot of maybe, but never a yes. And here's the key difference. Real relationships give you clarity. Situationships keeps you confused. So if you are feeling anxious more than you feel secure, if you're consistently guessing instead of actually knowing, if you're afraid to ask, what are we? Because you already know the answer, you're not in a relationship. You are in a situationship. So let's talk about real life examples, because sometimes you don't realize you're in a situationship until you see it clearly. Like when I mentioned how I was in one after I graduated from college, I had no idea that's what was happening, didn't know what to call it, didn't know that was the type of quote unquote relationship I was in. I just knew that it was so unclear, and it was just difficult, unclear, and you didn't know what to call it. So I had no idea. And a lot of people are like that. So what we're going to do right now, we're going to talk about some examples of a real relationship. And then we're going to talk about examples of a situationship. So let's first start with examples of a real relationship so that we'll know exactly what that is. So that if we ever get into a situation we're in a situationship, we'll definitely be able to spot it because we know what a real relationship should look like. So, examples of a healthy, real relationship is you're dating someone who communicates consistently. They check in. They make plans. They follow through. They introduce you to friends. They talk about the future. They show accountability. They respect your boundaries, and they make you feel emotionally safe. Dr. Sue Johnson says secure relationships are defined by responsiveness and emotional engagement. That's what real relationships look like. Someone who is emotionally present and available. Now, a situationship is you're talking to someone who texts you randomly. This is an example of what a situationship could look like, okay? You're talking to someone who texts you randomly. They disappear for days. They avoid defining the relationship. That can be like a red flag to let you know, okay, so maybe this isn't a real relationship. They say things like, I'm not ready for anything serious, but still want access to your time, your body, and your emotional energy. They give you mixed signals. They make you feel anxious, confused, or insecure. Dr. Kirsten Neff reminds us, self-compassion means refusing to settle for relationships that diminish your worth. Situationships diminish your worth by keeping you in emotional limbo. Now, I do want to say that there are times where someone may be okay with being in a situationship, especially if they're not looking for anything serious either, and that's perfectly fine. If you are in a situationship because you want to be in one, and right now you're not looking for anything serious, you're just starting to get your feet wet and dating, you're just feeling what it's like, just having fun, that is perfectly fine. And so I don't want you to feel any shame or anything like that if you are in a situationship, especially if you choose to be in one. I don't want you to feel any shame if you're in one or you don't choose to be in one because you didn't recognize what you were in. Like I said, it happened to me, it happens to all of us, right? But I do want to point out, if you want to be in a situationship and you're happy with that setup, that's perfectly fine to stay in the situationship. And so this episode would not be directly geared towards you, okay? This episode is geared toward people who are either in situationships and don't know how to get out of them, didn't realize they were in a situationship, or don't realize that's the type of relationship that they're in, or let's say they realize they're in a situationship but they want something more. This episode is for people who may want something more, a deeper connection, or they actually want to be in a healthy relationship at this time. So that's why we're talking about situationships and how to spot them. And I want to point out, if you choose to be in a situationship, your worth isn't being diminished or anything, because this is something you know you're in, this is what you want to do right now, and that's perfectly fine. If you are in a situationship but don't want to be in one, then it can diminish your worth because it's keeping you in emotional limbo, waiting on something or a relationship or a person that may never materialize, okay? So, how do we spot a situationship? The first answer and the first way you can know that you might be in one is if you feel confused more than you feel secure. You're afraid to ask for clarity. Your needs go unmet. Their effort is inconsistent. You're emotionally invested, but they're emotionally unavailable. You're hoping they'll change instead of seeing their patterns. Now, how do you get out of a situationship? That's important. And I would like to say the way to get out of any situation, especially situationships, is to acknowledge the reality. Acknowledge that you're in a situationship. Stop romanticizing potential and look at the patterns. Another way to get out of a situationship is to communicate clearly. Say what you want, and if they can't meet it, then that's your answer. Set boundaries. If clarity isn't given, step back. Choose yourself. Leaving confusion is an act of self-worth and self-love. And I would also suggest seeking support. Healing does happen in community. Situationships end the moment you decide confusion is no longer acceptable. Now, there is a psychology behind why sometimes we settle for less than what we deserve, okay? And that's because a lot of times we end up in situationships because of emotional patterns that are rooted in attachment, self-worth, and fear. I do want to point out that people don't end up in situationships because they're weak. They end up in situationships because of things that have happened in their past or early adulthood. A lot of the times it's because of things that happen in childhood that we don't even realize happened to us. So we are reacting based on on these patterns. If you were raised in a chaotic situation, or if you grew up in a home where healthy boundaries and self-love and all those things were not a part of your childhood, or if you didn't see healthy relationships, then you might think this is what a relationship is. So when you see a situationship, you just assume, hey, this is what a relationship is. It's not always consistent, it's rocky, this is just normal. And if you're thinking like that, this is why it would be easy to end up in a situationship and not know it, because we're thinking of it like, oh, well, this is normal. And in actuality, it's not that normal, and it's not normal. So when we talk about situationships and why people end up in them, there are some theories I would like to discuss. Attachment theory. Dr. Amir Levine, author of Attach, explained that people with anxious attachment often accept inconsistent love because inconsistency feels familiar. So if you grew up with unpredictable affection, inconsistency can feel like chemistry, but it's not chemistry, it's anxiety. Cognitive dissonance. Now, Dr. Leon Festinger describes cognitive dissonance as the discomfort we feel when our reality doesn't match our hopes. So in situationships, we might minimize red flags to avoid losing the person. We tell ourselves, well, it's not that bad, or maybe they'll change, because accepting the truth would actually hurt more than letting ourselves believe that maybe there's a chance this can work out. A lot of the times people stay in situationships because they are afraid of being alone. Psychologists note that loneliness can make people cling to emotionally unavailable partners. Many times people stay in situationships because of low self-worth. We accept the love we think we deserve. So if you don't believe you deserve clarity, you'll settle for confusion. If you don't believe you deserve consistency, you'll settle for inconsistency. If you don't believe you deserve respect, you'll tolerate control. But here's the truth. You deserve a relationship that feels like peace. You deserve someone who chooses you with clarity, not convenience. You deserve someone who shows up consistently, not occasionally. Settling for less is not love. It's fear disguised as connection. Before we close today's episode, I want to share our featured song of the week. And the name of the song is called Why I Left, and it is by our podcast artist and my alter ego, Emery Rose. So this song is deeply personal. It's about the moment when you finally choose yourself. The moment when you stop begging for clarity, the moment when you stop accepting emotional crumbs, the moment when you walk away from confusion and step into your worth. Why I Left is the anthem for anyone who has ever been in a situationship or a toxic relationship or been with an unavailable partner and who have chosen to leave. This song is the soundtrack of choosing peace over chaos, self-respect over fear, and healing over heartbreak. I'm also excited to share that all of the songs featured on the Worth Loving podcast this month is now available for streaming on Spotify and all major platforms. So if you have been loving the music, you can listen to every track right now. You can find Emery Rose artist link in the show notes, so make sure you check that out after the episode. Now, as I play this song, Why I Left, I wanted to remind you that leaving confusion is not losing love. It's about finding yourself.
I tried to tell you for a while, but you ignored how I felt. I tried to let you know I needed time to spend with you, just me and you. And every time I tried to talk to you, you minimized what I was going through. And every time I tried to let you know I needed you, you pulled away from me. Now you're blowing up my phone, telling me you love me. You can't figure out why I left you. Now you're blowing up my phone, telling me you're alone. You can't figure out why I left you. You wouldn't give me love, that's why I left. You wouldn't change your ways, that's why I left. I finally realized my worth, that's why I left you. It's hard for me to even look at you. I'm tired of all the things you do. I try to be there to support you, but you took my love for granted. Always taking and never giving back. These are years that I can never get back.
we wrap up today's episode, I want you to take a deep breath and let everything we talk about settle in your spirit. Situationships thrive in confusion. Real relationships thrive on clarity. Situationships keep you guessing. Real relationships keep you grounded. Situationships drain your emotional energy. Real relationships pour into you. You deserve a relationship that feels like peace. You deserve consistency. You deserve clarity. You deserve respect. You deserve accountability. You deserve someone who chooses you fully, not halfway, not sometimes, not only when it's convenient, but every time. So if you're in a situationship right now, I want you to know this. You are not stuck. You are not powerless. You are not unworthy. You can choose yourself at any moment. You can walk away from confusion. You can set boundaries. You can ask for clarity. And you can decide that settling for less is no longer an option. Your worth is not negotiable. Your needs are not too much. Your desire for clarity is not unreasonable. Your longing for real love is not unrealistic. It's human, it's valid, and it's yours. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. Thank you for choosing healing. Thank you for choosing growth. And thank you for choosing love, real love. Until next week, have an amazing day and a wonderful weekend because you are worth loving. Bye-bye.